I'm ready.
Hey Richard, how's it going today?
It's going great. How are you, Jason?
Good, good. Really excited that you're coming in and co-hosting the show. I think that the listeners are definitely going to get a ton out of this. You and I talk all the time, and they're always really fascinating conversations. And so, really excited to be doing this with you. I know one of the things that we've been talking about a lot lately is around safety in training BJJ and sort of the way that culture plays into it. And so, what are your just, I don't know, do you want to kick it off and talk about just some of your basic thoughts around being safe as an instructor and also as a student?
Um, you know, what prompted this conversation? Let's, they might as well know that there was a lawsuit and an injury, and there's been a lot of buzz around that, regardless of what happened or who was at fault or whatever. It still boils down to the the um, the environment when you go into a school. And it's been what I've kind of been on the bandwagon and probably will for a while, because I remember when I first got involved in jujitsu was for the smaller, weaker guy. Basically, that's how it was presented to me. But there's always, you start showing something so powerful, and people come in, and everybody puts what they have, what they bring to the table is what they bring before they have any technique. If they're big and strong, that's what they use. And but for training jujitsu for the long term, and that's and I know you're into it for the long term. I'm obviously into it for the long term because I love jujitsu. People ask me, "Do you train?" And I said, "I'm very selective, and mostly I won't do a lot of trains, but I'll do like positional stuff." And so I do that, but it's the environment that where I teach. I always, and I'm not one for absolutes generally, but that's one of the things that I want to have a safe environment. And one of the main things that creates a safe environment, and why I like what Gracie University has done, is that they set up a program specifically for beginners. And for a few months, you cannot spar. You're just learning the techniques. Because when people come into a class, and one of the things, and I'm sure you've heard this too, is that they look forward to that because they want to test what they want to test who they are, not what they know, because hell, they just learned something. I learned a guillotine, but how much are you applying a guillotine in your first spar? You might try it once, but the rest of the time, a guy goes to grab and you're just pushing them away.
Yeah.
So, and then you tend to just, and you go, and you feel good because you've worked up a sweat. And maybe you didn't get tapped because you're bigger and stronger than the guy you were going against. But what did you gain out of this?
That's something, that whole concept is something that I'm so passionate about, right? And you mentioned Gracie University. I've said it multiple times. I gladly drive 2 hours to get to class, and it's an hour and a half to come home, or a little over an hour. But it's always something where I wouldn't trade Gracie University for anything in the world because of that safety, and because with 90% of your partners, they are more of a flow role where you can work to integrate certain positions in, and you can have a conversation with your partner and say, hey, let's try to hit the move of the day. And it's more collaborative, and you could try these things out under 40, 50, 60% speed, as opposed to trying to do it in live fire when you're fighting for your life, right? So there, I think there is definitely a mentality shift between, you know, coming in as brand new and fighting for your life, and two people trying to, like, quote unquote get the win. So that, yeah, I agree with you. It's an interesting point, and I think that would you agree that your jujitsu evolves a lot quicker with that collaborative style, or do you think that sort of like snake pit mentality also has its benefits?
Well, you can have that other mentality after you learn something. I mean, like when I teach private class, I've had guys, and and I've talked to you about this. I've had guys come in from um, all over the place and ask me because of this.
Yeah,
I have to do a little cheap plug here.
nothing cheap about
This
that.
podcast is being brought to you by anyways, but
But it
it's
is
gotten me
actually.
it's gotten me a lot of exposure.
Yeah,
So, but when the people come to me for class, a lot of them are 30 years younger, easily 20 years younger, black belts, purple belts, brown belts. And what I end up showing, because, there's so much content out there, as you're well aware of, I like to do, I actually do what I thought I would never do, because I used to kind of, the guys used to kind of like, well, Horian, taught a class, he'd come in and he would just do a collar choke or do a few things, that show us things that we already knew. But that's what I ended up doing. I ended up just like when we spent a little time on the mat down at GU, showing you one little detail, that opens things up. And that to me is working on the technique, especially as we age, especially if we're going to be going with somebody bigger, heavier, and stronger. And that's what that's the one thing that why I got involved in jiu-jitsu. One, the effectiveness of it, and being able to survive against the bigger, stronger guy.
well, and going back to, and I remember it super well, right? It was a Friday night a few months ago, and you were showing me one minor modification to make to the Kimura, and but it was minor to you, but it was mind blowing to me that by changing an angle only slightly, by focusing your pressure a little bit differently, the entire move changed. The effectiveness of the move changed, and it just blew my mind. And so going back to that thing where you have a lot of people, I mean, they're not white and blue belts that are coming to you. You're talking about advanced belts come to you.
Right.
You can show a slight tweak to a move, and it's like a brand new move altogether, because something that didn't work for them previously, or something that worked sometimes for them now can work much more consistently, because of you're really showing a much more effective sort of slice of that move, right? Like just with a slight tweak. I know it blew my mind.
And the other thing too is when I teach some guys regularly in the school that I'm at, and one guy is a white belt, another guy is a blue belt, and they do a semi-private together. And one of the guys they're both around the same age. One's a little older. Well, I think one's 58, one's 56. They're both one guy's 205, the other guy might be 195. The heavier guy is the blue belt. But because of his background, and because of, he was a weightlifter, and he's been involved, he did train at Gracie Academy before it was Gracie University a few years ago, and he's been at a couple different schools, and he's been involved, about 7 years. But one of the things that I noticed when he rolls with people is that because he's strong, he tends to use his power. So all I've been doing with him is just showing him how to, like yesterday, we were going over defense when you're in the guard, someone's going to choke you. You know how someone puts the hand in your collar and puts there? Well, a lot of times what people do is they take their wrist and they back up, and they push the hand away.
Right.
And I said, that's great if I do it to you. But I said, I put my hand, I put my hand in his collar. He jerks it away. He puts his hand in my collar. And I'm like,
Not going to budge.
yeah, it's not going to budge. So, and just when he practices the collar choke, I remember Horian, when I would learn the collar choke over and over again, he would put his hand on my arm, because people are like, you can see the muscles just rippling in my arms right now. But then when they do it, they flex. And Horian would say, relax. And he would just keep this here until my body would just, so you'd be having a grip, but not flexing everything, having a firm grip, but not like everything is tight.
Right.
And that's one of the things that I'm doing with them. I do that. I say, look, instead of pushing the arms away right away when they're going to spar, because if you just sit there and go to attack and you don't let the person do anything, what are you having fun? Are you learning anything? I said, let the person put the hand here. Let's see. And I just saw Hiran talk about this with somebody. If he slowed down and saw how Hiran was escaping, he did it like 2 or 3 times. And then as he did it slower, he said, the other black belt, he said, I saw I was escaping and then corrected it. So I said, if you do this, this is how you're going to learn the defense, because you're going to see how people are doing this and you can defend. And when you're attacking, you're not using all your energy. I mean, that is the art of jiu-jitsu, not the sport of jiu-jitsu, because the sportive is athleticism for the most part.
You're right. No, that's a good point. And so there's 2 different mindsets. And I know this is something else that we've talked about, is when you have sport, there's a certain assumption that the other person is going to be pretty athletic. They're going to be in good shape. They'll be ready for competition. And you both have an approximation of the same types of attacks and defenses to go for. But then if you're talking purely self-defense and you're talking about adrenaline, size mismatches and whatnot, those are 2 completely different things, right? And so staying relaxed in both is obviously good. But to me, staying relaxed in a self-defense situation where there's no referee or a simple tap or whatnot, to me, it becomes even more critical to just be programmed to be more relaxed. And I don't know, that's how I look at it. Would you agree with that? Or obviously, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with it. I mean, it's amazing what has happened to this art. One of the things that's happening is that they're calling it a sport right away. And I heard a member of the Gracie family talk about, especially in light of what's happened, about how jiu-jitsu is kind of changing. And he said, what we used to do is like someone gave us crap and we would mix it up and like be ready to defend the honor, or show what art was better. Well, we don't have to do that anymore.
Yeah.
The world has taken jiu-jitsu by storm. We know the effectiveness of it. I mean, Horian, that's how we showed it. But we don't have to keep showing it like that. And that's why people are learning it. That's one of the reasons why we have to do what we do now. One, for safety. I mean, which we haven't really talked about too much yet. We've just talked about, the other aspect. But the reason that we want to train the way we train is for safety reasons. Because if we're going to stay in jiu-jitsu for a while, I mean, to go into a school and not have a beginner's curriculum, I mean, because look, I started, it was private. I am one of the few really blessed students that got to have privates with Horian, and really, and there really wasn't any sparring because there was no one to spar with other than Horian, and he was, going nice and relaxed. And so, a student would come along, and then we do positional stuff, and then it would slowly build up. But we had things to try, and whether we could pull them off or not, one of the things that I've said in my book, and I look back upon, is, and someone just posted something on Instagram about something that I said in my book, and it was, I went up against this wrestler who was probably 10 years younger and 50 pounds heavier. And even though I couldn't do anything to him, he couldn't do anything to me.
It was your sister's boyfriend, right?
There you go.
But that's a beautiful segue though, because that's one of the things that is super powerful in your book, right? Is you're talking about being in that moment and thinking, wait a second, I couldn't submit this person. And Horian's response I thought was perfect, right? And basically, what was it that Horian said?
Oh, I don't remember exactly what he said.
I think I do. Can I take a stab at it?
Go ahead.
He said, well, Richard, without Gracie Jiu Jitsu,
Oh yeah,
you would have gotten mauled. With Gracie Jiu Jitsu, you survived, and that is the first win. Is that pretty close?
yeah, yes. Paraphrasing, yes, but
Definitely paraphrasing, freestyle.
but and that's it. But see, most people are, when they go into jiu-jitsu, they're thinking right away, they're thinking about it, attacking, because it's like a friend of mine who's a white belt, who's 65 years old. He went to a local school, and he told me that, he said, yeah, we learned the triangle defense. And I thought, that's good. And he goes, Richard, I don't know the triangle. So there's not enough of a beginning curriculum to teach a basic move before we start to learn the defense for the move.
Yeah.
And a part of this is, that's a whole different conversation as far as what is happening in jiu-jitsu. But this is one of the reasons why we're having this conversation, because when you go into a class and you're looking for jiu-jitsu because you see how awesome it is, and you go there and all of a sudden, you had, 2 or 3 classes, or maybe your first class. Okay, it's time to spar. I'm like, if I would have went in when I started, which I think it was just before my 28th birthday, if I would have gone into a school and saw what I'm seeing now, I would have turned out.
Yeah.
I would have turned around. And I mixed it up. I trained, with bigger, stronger, heavier guys, but I wasn't thrown into it. And it was always, and you learn this. You have to be, I would, all of a sudden I'd be teaching something, and a person would kind of have that jerky kind of movement, and you get hit in the face, hit in the mouth, hit in the eye, hitting the ribs, hitting the groin, people pulling your fingers.
No, that's the big one for me.
Yeah. So, but the more that you can kind of get into an environment where you're being taught what you can and can't do for safety reasons, and we're talking about the majority of the people, not the exceptions. There's always guys that can go in that are beasts, that want to mix it up, and they're younger, and they just have that mentality of like fight, but that's a minority of people.
And in my opinion, they're actually doing a massive disservice to not only their longevity in their training, but also their near-term progress, right? Because if I go in and if I want to win every round. All I'm going to do is use the one or two moves that I think I can win with, without all of the other exploration or the mental exploration of the sensitivity of, well, if I do this, like the expedition, right? If I do this, what are they going to do? If all I want to do is try to win and like win that round, I don't feel like the growth is there. Plus, to your point, which is a really good point, the injuries are going to build up. No matter how young, old, no matter how fit you are, the injuries start building up if you're always going aggro, for lack of a better way of putting it. And it just feels like if you play the long game in jiu-jitsu, it's life-changing. I mean, obviously, you're a testament to that, right? And you talk about in your book, like all of the life benefits you've gotten from jiu-jitsu. I feel bad when people come in with that win-win-win mentality, because they're not going to win every round. People are going to be better. Their growth is going to plateau super fast. And then they're going to struggle with that thing about wanting to quit. That's just my opinion. I mean, do you think that, to sort of sum that up and to see if you agree, do you agree that trying to win every round is something that slows somebody's progress down, as opposed to your point, sort of giving up positions and seeing like how to work your way out of them, as opposed to flailing? And I know I didn't even repeat it that well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you knew the answer to the question before you asked it.
I felt pretty confident. Yeah. Not going to
Yeah.
lie. Felt pretty confident.
And what's interesting too is that I was speaking to Chris Saunders this morning, and he was talking about some people that he sparred with. One a brown belt who was very technical, and then another black belt who's kind of a bigger, stronger guy. And he has made comments, and because Chris is, I think if he's not 60, he's going to be 60 very soon. And he's Hickson's first black belt, and he was saying that in even though the guys are bigger than him and younger, he says, there's certain moves that they're getting me with, and let's say a guillotine or something, and it turns into a crank.
Yep.
And and it's kind of like, one of the things when I'm teaching any kind of chokes, I say, look, sometimes it might be uncomfortable, but I said, and if you're in the street, you do what you got to do. But when you're in the school and you're amongst your friends, you don't want to crank their neck.
Never.
You don't want to tweak their arms. The person's, I've had guys where I've caught them in an arm lock and they would not tap. I let go of the arm lock. I did not want to be responsible for, dislocating a shoulder or an elbow, so, and this is at a school, but, he was just saying that when certain people, when you tell them that, they get pissed.
Yeah.
And, but this is going to happen anywhere, even when you're rowing, there's just, because of, even in the safest of schools, there's still going to be a few guys that, because of their, I don't know if I said this to you earlier, if I said it to you, before we did the Zoom, there's guys that can apply moves or a defense that will work on somebody because the person that they're doing to is smaller. But like, one of the things that I have really become opinionated about is, I say, look, if you're going to do a defense on me, good. But if I can't make the defense work against you, if you have 50 pounds on me, again, it goes back to, why is jiu-jitsu here? It's here to help the smaller, weaker guy against the bigger guy. So whether it be jiu-jitsu or anything else, if you're able to do it, smash the smaller guy, you don't need, like, Horian used to say, or other people used to say, you don't need jiu-jitsu. I don't need jiu-jitsu to smash a 10-year-old.
Yep.
Because because when we think about the size difference, I mean, I'm 140 pounds, we look back, a 10-year-old is going to be about 90 pounds. I don't need jujitsu for that.
Right.
So, and even though I know jujitsu and I can kind of, I can do the move, make it harder for the person to defend. The point is that I can't do what they're showing. I can't do it to him, because the person who showed him, there's a guy that's, he's a big boy, over 250. He's a black belt, but people don't realize the mass. A lot of people don't realize the mass that they have. They just show a move and they go like, there you go. See this, and maybe the person who they're showing kind of go, well, I'm not that good at it. That's why it doesn't work for me.
No, that's a fair point. And just 5 seconds to hop back to Chris Saunders. For people who don't know Chris, not only is he a treasure in jiu-jitsu, he's a treasure in the world. Chris Saunders is one of the coolest people. And somebody who's given me some great advice and been really generous over the years. And so I just wanted to shout out that Chris is a legend on so many levels. But I love when you talk with people like Chris, because you and Chris have that same basic like time frame lineage, right? Like obviously, you were a bit earlier and whatnot, but it's like coming at it from that approach of really understanding the technique. And it was about the technique, right? And then to your other point, that jujitsu has taken the world by storm. And with that, it's like all of a sudden it starts coming into sport terms, winning, seeing a flashy move on, whether it's UFC or one fighting championship or whatever, and people coming in and they're really athletic and they want to replicate that. And so I think it's an interesting evolution. Do you think that with that shift in mentality, and you're right, there's a certain percentage of people who will always have that mentality, but do you think that there's a certain sort of culture that you can create at your academy that says, wait, let's pump the brakes and let's know the triangle really well before we learn the triangle defense really well? Do you think that that is important, to have the culture of kind of like pump the brakes, or no, it's okay to show the flashiest moves?
Well, it's okay to show flashy moves after you learn the basics.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after you really, and not just learn a bit, but because when I say learn the basics, I mean own the basics.
I know.
The one thing is like that any student that's been with me for a while, they kind of make fun of me, and they go like, if they've been in my class for like at least a year, minimum of a year but mostly over a year, and they'll just go, and they'll make a comment like, oh yeah, we learn, it's like Richard says relax all the time, and they own the move, because I spend a lot of time on the same move over and over. I'd rather show 70% less moves just so the people can learn and own the move that I've shown them. Because I can go and show a move and then next week show something else, and they might think it's cool, but after they're starting to practice it over and over again, like for instance, I've done to some women in class a choke, where you grab their, like a rape choke.
Yeah.
Or if you try to do a collar choke from someone's guard and you don't know, one of the things that people do is, if they're kind of a beginner, and you may have even shown this a half dozen times or so, and you go for a collar choke in their guard, and they're like, get your hands up. And I say, let me come in my guard. I says, put your hands here. Get a really good adjustment. And they'll go, and then all of a sudden I just kind of push away a little bit and just hit an arm lock. And I go, here you go. So let the person practice, learn how to do the fundamentals, see what you can and can't do from a position. Because when people spar right away, let's say they learn the Americana arm lock, one of the first moves you learn when you're mounted.
Yep.
Or even the collar choke. and they're fighting in gi, and they get in someone's guard, and instead of passing the guard, they go, oh, the collar choke. I'm going to go for the collar choke, right? And the person in the bottom is doing this, or they go for an Americana, and they're like, no, don't grab my arm. And I'll just like, I said, you should not be able to, you shouldn't be tapping if someone does an Americana when they're in your guard, because all you got to do is go to their back. It's
Right.
Every single time someone's tried it, I said, look, but it's those kind of things that when you're sparring and you just do it, and the other person they're sparring against just kind of, what's being learned? Very little.
Right. And so, I mean, again, it comes back down to that mentality of training the correct responses without the win or loss attached to it. Right. So I'm a big fan of positional sparring, and especially positional sparring into positions that I don't normally get into. Right. And there are certain ones. And I like that because then you lose that sort of like trapped under ice feeling of, oh my gosh, I've never been here before. You could be there 20 times and you still, but if you're not conditioned to the correct response, it's very easy to just flail. I mean, I still fall victim to that, in certain cases, but I try to set a tempo for each role that I'm in to where it is way more flow, because I'm 51 now and I want to do this for, the rest of my years, really. And I think if I flail, I wouldn't have that many more years on the mat. It's just too easy to get injured.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and going back, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and it also kind of ties back into the safety thing. Like at Gracie Academy, I feel really blessed that the instructors, there is a mentality from the top down where it's safety first and it's peer-to-peer respect. And if somebody doesn't show it, they'll get talked to, or they'll get on track. But I don't know if every academy has that, right? And I think that's the slippery path. And again, that's why I'm willing to drive 2 hours to get to class and hour and change to get home, because I always feel safe there. And I feel like my peers also have my best interest in mind. Obviously, as you're rolling with newer people that you're just meeting for the first time, definitely a lot more caution. But I think if you lead with collaborative flow, it feels like most of the time people stick with it. Now, some people don't, but that's kind of easy to get out of. But when you think about creating that culture, I know that you're very famous for the lectures, right? And they pick it up, and it makes me laugh whenever we talk about the lectures. Can you just share, like, if you see people, like, can you just share some of the stuff about the lectures? I love that.
Okay, and also, in case I forget, one of the things that I was going to say when you brought this up is, like, for the new person who's tuning in, or a pretty new person that's turning in, what can they do? I mean, my concern is, how do they look for a school for their own safety? So that's one of the things, after I answer the question that you just asked, that's one of the things that I'd like to do, is just be able to give that newer person who's looking for a school.
We should have some white belts on. We should have some white belts on the podcast to discuss. I think that's a great thing right there too.
Yeah, I'm sure my other friend who I met him over a year ago, and he read my book like 3 times, and he wanted to interview me. And he's a 65-year-old, and he's a white belt, and he's helped trying to get me to teach a curriculum in a local school. But anyways, about a year and a half ago, I got sick. I had COVID. I was up in Washington State. I went up to visit my mom for, I don't know, 10 days or so, and got really sick. And this is when, like, the worst of the variants were around. And I ended up staying there for 7 weeks in Washington. So the place that I teach at, when I went back there was another guy teaching the class, and he was very much into sport. So when I went back in there, and I saw the mentality of the guys when they sparred, about how different it was. So when I see this kind of stuff, not just, it's one thing if you have a couple stragglers that are going, but the mentality of everybody who was sparring was like this. So instead of saying, hey, stopping one guy, guys, time out, and I said, look, we're amongst friends here, and you guys, everything is all of a sudden so serious, and you guys want it so bad. And I says, when injuries happen, and I says, there's not much technique going on, it's just using a lot of power. So, and that would, I'd kind of call it to their attention, and I'd say, no, calm down. And all of a sudden it would kind of, another week would go by, and it's kind of same thing. Another week would go by, and I'm bringing it to their attention. Finally, maybe I didn't get enough sleep or whatever, and it just struck me, and I finally go, guys, stop, time out. I said, what in the hell's going on here? And I'd sit there and I would start to talk about this, and I'd say, I've continually brought it to your attention, but nothing's being done. So I said, this is part of an educational punishment. Although I didn't use those terms, but I just said, if you guys like to hear me lecture you, I said, I don't like to hear me lecture you. And I know you guys don't like to hear, but when I see this, I don't know what else to do when I've continually said, guys, you need to calm down and let's start thinking about technique and wanting things less, because some of you are physically gifted, but others of you aren't. And so I just go into like a lecture mode, and I'm sure that some of the guys that aren't appreciate it, but some of the guys that, because I look at their faces when I'm lecturing, I'm going, oh crap, we have to hear Richard again, like this old guy that just, like a crotchety old man or something. But I honestly don't know what else to do when I see this happening. I mean, it's like I got to like stop the class and go, okay, look, guys, I can do this. You want to waste the time of the class? Fine. I get paid either way. And, but it takes a while. The same way I've had students that have been with me for a while now, and that they kind of come clean. I've had guys that have been with me for, gosh, over the years, guys that have been with me for, a few years, come to me. Like, I remember there was one guy, was a big Swede, and he comes up to me like 3 years after his training, and he goes, I understand what you mean by relax now.
It's so funny.
3 years. 3 years. Oh, really? It just kind of sunk in, huh?
Let's be honest with each other. It wasn't the lack of sleep. It's one of the things I love about you is you say what you believe, and it's like, and you care about their best interest. And I think that's one of the coolest things. And I've seen it at Gracie University. You'll take anybody, no matter how long they've been training, no matter what their belt, and you care about them. And so I totally get the lecture because of all of the different things that you could show them. You could show them magical techniques. Without them relaxing as a collective group, they're not going to retain. So it's like, I love the fact that is the cornerstone to progress in training, is you need to relax so you can absorb this stuff. But it wasn't lack of sleep. I guarantee you that.
But there may be a little,
a little frustration.
Yeah, maybe someone cut me off in traffic, or there was too much traffic on the way to the school, and some frustration built up. Maybe it was just like, okay, I haven't lectured in a while.
You just wanted to see him get better. But that's one thing I really like. And it's why I feel really lucky to have gotten to know you, is because you are like, the wisdom you have, not only around jiu-jitsu, but also around life, and your willingness to share it, I think is super cool. And going back to technique, or were you going to say something?
No. I mean, to me, if you have something, this is what it's about. It's about getting it and giving it.
but that we need more of that. Like we definitely need more of that. And again, that's the collaborative versus I'm going to keep it for me so I can keep beating you with this secret, right? Because there's a lot of that, and I love the fact that jujitsu as a whole, I think the jujitsu community as a whole is amazing. Now, is there a certain percentage that's not? That's definitely ego driven for sure. Like, but that's just, a microcosm of society or the world. But I love how collaborative and how the jujitsu community is open to share, and I think it can go even that much further with with the promotion of that message of collaborative mindset. And again, at Gracie University, I feel so blessed that there's so many, really, really solid practitioners, all different belt levels where they have something. So Carla at Gracie University caught this really cool technique that I'd never seen before. And I want to ask her to like break it down for me. But the guy that she showed it to, I asked him and he showed me, and I was like, wow, that's like really solid. And so people are willing to share. And I love that. And going back to the safety thing, safety for me is not even a two-way street. It's kind of like this roundabout with all these different inputs to it, right? You have the culture, which needs to promote safety. The instructors need to promote safety, and then peer-to-peer, you need to promote safety. But also, I promote safety with my instructors, right? If I'm working with my instructor and he lets me get him into a certain move, I have an obligation not to do a neck crank, not to try to pop an armbar really quick. I mean, they're letting me set it up. And so I know that as an instructor, you've probably seen students that come too hard at you, despite all of your years of experience. Do you see, do you agree with me that you've seen that? And is there a way to combat that as an instructor? Because instructors have joints too, right? It's easy to get hurt if you're doing it all day.
Well, it's interesting is that I was doing last week in class. We were doing basic standard headlock escape. And, one of the things that people do is they make the frame. And then when they get on top, one of the things that people do, if they slide their hip away and take the person back, what they do is they follow them as the person rolls away. And then all of a sudden they're on top.
Yeah.
But the person on the bottom now has you still in a headlock. But one of the things that beginning students do as they make the frame and they roll to a different position, their hands stay on the neck. So, and I'm constantly, and I mean constantly going, guys, because I remember what Horan used to say is once you get to the top, you don't need to keep your hands in the neck, get base.
Yeah.
Your most important thing is once you're on top, to stay there, keep a decent amount of base, because what's the guy going to do if it's a fight? How can he hit you? He lets go. Your hands are free to control their hands.
Yep.
So there was a guy, it's a purple belt, and he's working with a student that's been off and on with me, and he's an older guy. He's I think he's just a little older than me, and he's in his 70s. And he was, and this guy that this purple belt, he's in his late 30s, and he's a bigger guy. But he was telling me, he says, Richard, man, he said, my neck is like my shoulder and neck over here, just from the guy putting the frame in, to make me let go. And I said, look, when I'm teaching a private class and a person comes on top and goes to make that frame, I don't let them torture me. I won't let them just use a lot of power. I use my hand to protect myself. And I always make sure, I say, look, get the right leverage, because you don't have to smash, because I'll watch people and they'll sit there and they'll grind and grind and grind. They're putting all this pressure and the person's not letting go because they don't feel enough pain.
Right.
And I'll come over to them without putting a lot of grind and just take the blade of my arm and I bring it down lower here, and I just put a little bit, and I go, so there. I said, so you don't have to do this. So when they're doing it to me, I place their arm where I want it, and I make sure they're not using a lot of power, and I just place it there just so I can feel it. And I said, and then I let go. But that's part of learning how to teach, to protect your joints. And again, I was I was blessed to have not just be Horian's private student for, roughly 10 years, but go through the instructor certification, the first instructor certification, which there was only 4 of us and it was just Horian. But I also assisted him when he was teaching other private classes. So what I got was not what a lot of people get when it comes to teaching that kind of stuff and for safety. But even still, things happen. It's jiu-jitsu. It's a physical thing. I told my mother that, I said, what about the guy that, got injured? And I said he was paralyzed, and at that time I thought it was for life. It turns out that it's not. And she goes, maybe you should think about doing something else, Richard. And I said, Mom, I've been involved in jiu-jitsu now for 40 years, been teaching them for 30 years now. I said, I'm not going anywhere. One is, yeah, do I get hurt on occasion? Something will do something. Yeah. But, he kind of taught me how to preserve myself and how to help other people preserve their own body, because, and especially as instructors, we have to control what's happening around us.
Definitely. No, that's a good point. And I think it comes back to the thing that we really led it off with was thoughtful jujitsu, right? It isn't where every round is like win or lose. It's like, taking the long game approach and figuring out, okay, like what is the best way to learn? What is the best way to teach? What is the mentality you need from that, which transcends any sort of, victory in a single round, right? Your technique gets better, you have more longevity. The friendships, again, for me, the friendships in jiu-jitsu are amazingly good. They're my best friends now, right? And it's like I don't want to injure anybody, and I may, out of my own ignorance, be the guy that's grinding on the neck, thinking that's what I'm supposed to do. But if we have rapport and you say, no, 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 just place it down here, you don't need to grind. And it's like, and if you tell me one time, it would never happen again, right? So sometimes I think that those conversations are incredibly important, and I think that peer-to-peer respect is huge. And again, though, for me, as a student, not an instructor, if if I'm with Sam at Gracie University, and he lets me get him into a position, I'm not going to go and crank something, right? And he'll tell me, you can do this, you can do that. And I'm like, yeah, but I wouldn't have gotten you in this position, so I'm not going to crank your arm and risk something. So we end up like laughing about things like that. So I do hold my instructors in this very coveted position of, okay, listen, I didn't catch you in this position, you let me catch you, so I'm going to go slow with the things that I do because I don't want to have any accidents, right? That's maybe that's just a me personality thing. I don't know, but no, and I always love hearing you talk about your approaches to teaching, because I think that they're really profound. And going back to the Friday night when you showed me the Kimura, that changed my entire perception of things. Do you see, and again, I think that I'm answering my own question. I think I know the answer before asking it, but I see a lot of value in your approach of really breaking down a technique and really owning that technique. So you can also modify it based on body types, based on situations. And if you shift your hips out this way a little bit more, like really owning the technique in such detail, as opposed to, being an acquaintance of 1,000 terms, 1,000 techniques, to really owning a handful of techniques. A, would you agree with that? And B, how many techniques would you really consider owning to be mandatory? I know there was a lot we gave you to unpack.
So I agree with you, and I think basically, if you owned about we're talking over a period of time now. We're not, so
Sure,
when you own something, it's going to take you, you know, depending how often you practice, a couple years.
for sure.
So, but I think that if you owned a minimum of 40 to 50 techniques, and I'm talking escapes as well as finishing moves, because the technique can also be, and then there's principles of the techniques, and I'll tell them, and one of the things that I never really paid much attention to when I was using what was, when Henry came out with the 32 principles. And so I would just say, I'd say, look, this is a frame, and leverage. So pure technique and combine, it's a tough question, because a lot of it is principle based. Like I'll tell people, like when you're going to pass the guard, when you first learn a guard pass and you're on your knees, and what people do is they don't, like, if you're in a fighting stance, right? Your feet are about shoulder width apart, maybe a little more, and you're moving around. And you equate it when you're on your knees passing the guard, you still have to stay in base. Otherwise, you get tossed over easily.
Azushi.
So but that's principle. That's not really a technique. It's a principle. Because I say, look, whether you're playing baseball, football, any kind of sport, you're always moving in base. Baseball especially, I played baseball as a kid. You move from side to side, you're in base. You don't have your legs too wide. You don't have your legs too narrow. Like when you're playing infield or outfield, you're there, so you can move side to side. Same kind of a thing. So I said, principles are principles. In karate and boxing, whatever, how you stand, like, because a lot of times when people do a headlock defense, they're on their back and then they turn on their side. And instead of their hands staying here, they'll put the hand that's on the ground, they'll get it trapped.
Yep.
And I'll go, guys, you wouldn't step into a fight with one arm down unless you're really super talented, but it would take years of experience for you to do that. To start out with, your hands are like this. It's a common thing. You get into a confrontation or something, like, hey man, I'm sorry. Your hands are ready to do what they do. It's principle based. It's principle.
So Richard, that is fascinating though. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, but that is fascinating, right? Because I wish I would have seen the 30. So I saw the 32 principles for the first time when I was late in my blue belt, just before I got my purple. And when I started going through those, and I still watch the 32 principles all the time, if I would have seen those first, it would have given so much more context when I was a brand new white belt. Like I wish I saw the 32 principles first, because I agree with that, spot on. It's all in the principles, and base is just one of them, right? Momentum and energy conservation and things like that. The pyramid principle, absolute key.
Yeah. And framing, I mean, it's just
Connection.
Yeah. I mean, again, I've used, didn't realize that, I kind of adapted the language as, like the principle, just the connection alone, and I used to say this before anything. I just would say, like, when you're going for a move on somebody, one of the things that I remember when I used to roll with any of the, because back then, look, when I rolled it was either with Horian or somebody who was an upper belt, maybe, if Hickson came in or Hoyler or Hickson or Hoist. It always felt like, that every move that I made, the tighter they got on me. Like having a boa constrictor on you. You kind of like, and I would tell them, I said, that's how you want to be. You want to, like when I'm talking about doing a rear naked choke, as you get in, I said, look, you're making a connection, everything. You don't want to you start on your knees. You don't want to have space. You want to make everything tight.
Right.
And then I would say to them, I said, space equals escape. You're always looking for that space so you can get away. So as the person doing the move, you're want to be as connected as possible. I may have not used that language, but it's something that I was teaching and doing. So, but again, it's a principle type of thing. So, to go back to the question, I don't know how many pure techniques alone, possibly even less than 50, but a lot of it is also principle based. Doing the tech. Well, I guess if you own the technique, then you're already getting that, and part of it is principle too. So
But and if you own the principle, your technique is going to be greatly enhanced.
That's right.
Right. And so that's perfect. And I know that we've been going for over an hour now. Were there, and so maybe we should start wrapping it up, but were there any other things that you wanted to throw in? Yeah, were there any other things you wanted to throw in? I know there's a lot of stuff going on right now, and I can't wait that weekly we're going to be doing this, and sometimes we'll be having other people in and whatnot. Anything else to throw in?
No, but like what I was saying earlier is like, for that person who might be asking, like, how do I find that right school, the right fit for me? And it's not an easy question to answer. Most people will give you, I know where I'm at right now, and at 360 self-defense. I mean, Ricky is very generous and gives 2 weeks free.
Wow, that's pretty solid.
Come and take any or all of the classes you want and see if it's a fit for you. So I know a lot of places will give you at least one free class. But even before you take the class, come in and watch.
Yep.
Go in and, because basically, in essence, this is a school.
Yeah.
So, and it's also, when you think about the preservation of your body, I mean, where I used to be over at Krav Maga, a lot of the students there, remember because Krav Maga, when I first got there was principally stand up, that mentality of strike, and get away. And they weren't used to, like, what? And all of a sudden, because they'd leave their fitness class or their Krav Maga class, and they'd look, and we'd see guys sparring and kind of going at it, and they don't know the mentality that they really, because I always kept my classes under control. But still, guys are rolling, you don't really know that. So some people would be like intimidated and go, no, I don't really want the ground. And then it was after a while, we're talking a few years, and a certain key amount of students and some of the instructors that would come to my class. And especially when they would do like testing for a Krav test, and when it would come to the ground portion of the test, all of the guys that were the instructors that would go through the testing that went through my class, they just aced the ground. And everyone go like, how are you doing that? And they go in their class, you need to go and take Richard's class. You need to go and take the class. And they would tell the women there, just go in. And I would tell people when I'd see them at the door, I go, yeah, come on in, and we'd talk a little bit. I said, you don't have to do this. And I recommend you don't spar right away, but talk to the person, see the mentality of them, and give it a gauge. And I wouldn't sign any long-term contracts to start out with anything. I really want to say, like, try it for a month. See what it's like. I think within a month, you should know what you're getting for that new person. Yeah. So, but anyways, that and more to come. We're looking, anybody that, one of the things that we haven't really, we may have talked about it, but not a lot, is the theme of what we're, I'm not interested in going out and interviewing world champions. I have no problem with them, okay, to hear right now, because, and anyone who's done that is great. It's amazing. but we're looking at jujitsu as a lifestyle kind of mentality. So, you know, and I already know some people that have competed, and it just came to me. There's a guy in Arizona that I'd like to have on the show. He's a black belt who really, he said, Richard, I walked away from all this stuff. He says, this is what I want to teach now.
Yeah.
I want to teach I want to teach the fundamentals. So that's what, you know, the theme of the show will be, you know, plus. I mean, that's just, and just to give you fair, we didn't really talk too much about this, and here I am taking over.
No, but this is exactly, I mean, I think this is a perfect combination, and you're right. It is about jujitsu lifestyle for everybody, right?
Right.
It's like, no matter who you are, there is definitely a spot on the mat for you. And to go about it the right way will make all the difference in the world. And I will say, there is nobody better than Mr. Richard Bresler here to talk about that. So
thank you. And one thing before we go.
Yeah.
If we're going to be a co-host.
Oh, yeah.
On the lower right-hand corner of the screen, I see your name. I don't see my name anywhere on the screen.
Mine is on the lower right hand. Yours is on the lower right hand side or lower left hand side.
I don't see it on mine.
Okay. I'll get you hooked up. I'll even have like a little star next to it.
Okay. There you go.
Oh yeah, we'll take good care of you. Trust me.
Okay. Again, guys, if you haven't read it, it's getting rave reviews.
And it's just like Lay's potato chips. You can't eat just one. You can't read it just one time. Take it from me, personal experience.
Yeah. So, anyways, so I'm looking forward in the weeks to come as far as what we're going to be doing, and we're going to have some very interesting guests, and we'll dive deep more into jiu-jitsu.
So the journey is taking an interesting turn, and I'm looking really forward to it.
Yeah, me too.
Richard, thank you so much, and hope everybody enjoyed listening. We will be back soon with some more riveting entertainment.
Great. Have a good one, guys.
Yeah.